This is Tom Doody, middle-aged American living in New Jersey near the Lincoln Tunnel. If you were to visit my website, you would type Howdy Doody into Google. You'll find the correct spelling of the famous puppet. You then combine Tom Doody in a Google search for my site from Vanity Fair magazine. September 2013, Goldman Programmer, Part 4. There were many problems with Goldman's system. In Serge's view, it wasn't so much a system as an amalgamation. The code-developed practices in IDT were much more organized and up-to-date than Goldman, he says. Goldman had bought the core of its system 9 years earlier in an acquisition of one of the early electronic trading firms called Trading Hall. The massive amount of old software, Serge guessed that the entire platform had as many as 60 million lines of code in it. In 9 years of fixes, it had created a computer equivalent of a rubber band ball. When one of the rubber bands popped, Serge was expected to fix it, and fix it. One small example of the kind of problem Serge found, Goldman's trading on the NASDAQ exchange. Goldman owned the lone unmarked building directly across from the street from NASDAQ in Carteret, New Jersey. The building housed Goldman's dark pool. When Serge arrived, 40,000 messages per second were flying back and forth between computers inside the two buildings. Approximately, he assumed, must offer Goldman Sachs some advantage. After all, why else buy the only building anywhere near the exchange? But when he looked into it, he found that to cross the street from Goldman to NASDAQ, the signal took 5 milliseconds, or nearly as much time as it took a signal to travel to the fastest network in Chicago and to New York. Theoretical limit of sending a signal from Chicago to New York is something like 7 milliseconds, said Serge. Every time more than that is a friction caused by man. The friction could be caused by physical distance. Say, if a signal is moving across the street in Carteret, New Jersey, traveling is some less direct than a straight line. It could be caused by computer hardware. The top high-frequency trading firms chucked out their old gear and bought new stuff every few months, but it could also be caused by slow, clunky software. And that was Goldman's problem. Their high-frequency trading platform was designed in typical Goldman style, centralized hub-and-spoke system. Everything sent was required to pass through the mothership in Manhattan before it went back into the marketplace. But the latency, the 5 milliseconds, wasn't mainly due to the physical distance, said Serge. It was layers of corporate switching equipment. After a few months working on the 42nd floor of One New York Plaza, at the time the site of Goldman's main equity trading floor, and once the site of Salomon Brothers trading floor, Serge came to the conclusion that the best thing they could do with Goldman's high-frequency trading platform was to scrap it all together and build a new one from scratch. His bosses weren't interested. The business model of Goldman Sachs was, if there is an opportunity to make money right away, let's do that, he says. But if there was something long-term, they weren't interested. Something would change in the stock market, and change would introduce a new complicated rule, for instance. And that change would create an immediate opportunity to make money. They'd want to do it immediately, said Serge, but if you think about it, it's just patching the existing system constantly. The existing code base becomes an elephant that's difficult to maintain. That is how he spent the vast majority of his 2 years at Goldman, maintaining the elephant. Oddly, he found his job more interesting than the stock market trading he was enabling. I think the engineering problems are much more interesting than the business problems, he says. Finance is just who gets money. Does it wind up in the right pocket or the left pocket? So just what happens to companies that make money aren't companies like Goldman Sachs. You can't really win in that game unless you're one of these people who receives the hints. He understood that Goldman's quants were forever dreaming up new trading strategies in the form of algorithms for the robots to execute, and that these traders were meant to be extremely shrewd. He grasped further that all their algorithms are premised on some sort of prediction, predicting something seconds into the future. But if you need only to have observed the 2008 stock market crash or inside Goldman Sachs, as Serge had, to see what seemed predictable often was not. Day after volatile day in September 2008, Goldman's supposedly brilliant traders were losing tens of millions of dollars. All of the expectations didn't work, recalls Serge. They thought they controlled the market, but it was an illusion. Everyone would come to work and were blown away by the fact that they couldn't control anything at all. Finance was gambling game for people who enjoyed gambling. Serge wasn't a gambler by nature. He preferred a deterministic world of programming and pseudo-deterministic world of speculation, and he never fully grasped the connection between work and the Goldman traders. He knew they were obsessed with the speeds he created for them, but he was never convinced the work he was doing to speed up their robots led to greater profits. He was ever clear if we shaved off a half a millisecond what the advantage would be, he said. He did studies, but they were imperfect and not conclusive. The obvious thing he did to make Goldman robots faster was exactly what he had done at IDT, to enable millions of phone calls to find the cheapest route. He decentralized Goldman's system. Rather than have signals travel from various exchanges back to Goldman's hub, he set up separate mini Goldman hub inside each of the exchanges, but most of the time he spent simply patching the old code. To do this, he and the other Goldman programmers resorted every day to open source software, available free to anyone for any purpose. Tools and components they used were not specifically designed for financial markets, but they could adapt to repair Goldman's plumbing. Serge quickly discovered, to his surprise, that Goldman had a one-way relationship with open source. They took huge amounts of free software off the web, and they did not return any of it after they had modified it, even when his modifications were very slight and of general rather than financial use. Once I took open source code components, repackaged them, opened them up with a component that was not even used at Goldman Sachs, he says, it was basically a way to make two computers look like one. So if one went down, the other could jump up and perform the task. He described the pleasure of his innovation this way. If I created something out of chaos, you would create something out of chaos, especially the reduced entropy in the world. He went to his boss, a fellow named Adam and asked if he could release it back to open source, and was his inclination. He said it was now Goldman's property, recalls Serge. He was quite tense. When I mentioned it, it was very close to bonus time, and he didn't want to cause any disturbances. Open source is an idea dependent on collaboration and sharing, and Serge had a long history of contributing to it. He didn't fully understand how Goldman think it was okay to benefit so greatly from the work of others and behave so selfishly toward them. You don't create intellectual property, he said. You create a program that does something. But from then on, instructions from Schlesinger, he treated everything on Goldman's servers even as if it had just been transferred there from open source as Goldman Sachs property. At Serge's trial, Kevin Marino, his lawyer, flashed 2 pages of computer code, the original with its open source license on top and a replica with the open source license stripped off and replaced by Goldman Sachs license. The funny thing was Serge actually liked Adam Schlesinger and most of the other people who worked with at Goldman. He liked less the environment the firm created to work in. Everyone lived for year-end numbers, he believes. You get satisfied when the bonus is sizable, and you get not satisfied when the number is not. Everything there is very possessive. It made no sense to him that people were paid individually for achievements that they essentially were collective. It was quite competitive. Everyone's trying to show how good their individual contribution to the team is because the team doesn't get a bonus, the individual does. More to the point, the environment Goldman created for its employees, he felt, did not encourage good programming because good programming is by nature collaborative. Essentially, there was a very minimal connection between people. He says, in telecom, you usually have some synergies between people. Meeting when people exchange ideas, they aren't under stress in the way at Goldman it was always. Some component is broken and we're losing money because of it. Fix it now. The programmers assigned to fix the code sat in cubicles and hardly spoke to one another. When 2 people wanted to talk, they would just do it out on the floor, says Serge. They would go into one of the offices around the floor, close the door. I never had an experience in telecom like that or academia. By the time the financial crisis hit, Serge had a reputation of which he himself was unaware. He was known to corporate recruiters outside Goldman as the best programmer in the firm. There were 20 guys on Wall Street who could do what Serge could do, says a headhunter who works often for high-frequency trading firms. And he's the one of the best, if not the best. At Goldman, the programmer types tend not to know their true worth. They were in a different room from the traders who were far more alive to the bigger picture, to their context. They knew their worth in marketplace, down to the last penny. They understood the connection between what they did and how much money was made, and were good at exaggerating the importance of the link. Serge wasn't like that. He was a little picture person, narrow problem solver. I think he didn't know his own value, says a recruiter. He compensated for being narrow by being good. He was that good. Given his character and his situation, it's hardly surprising that the market kept finding Serge Aleynikov at telling what he was worth, rather than the other way around. The few months into the new job, headhunters were calling him every other week. A year into his new job, he had a job offer from UBS, a Swiss bank, and promised to bump his salary to $400,000 a year. Serge didn't particularly want to leave Goldman just to go to work for another big Wall Street firm. So when Goldman offered to match the offer, he stayed. But in early 2009, he had another call with a very different kind of offer, to create a trading platform from scratch for a new hedge fund and run for a 39-year-old Russian fellow named Misha Malishev. The prospect of creating a new platform rather than constantly patching the old one excited him. Plus, they were willing to pay him more than $1 million a year to do it, and suggested he might open an office for him near his New Jersey home. He agreed. When he told Goldman he was leaving, his bosses asked him what they could do to persuade him to stay. They were trying to pursue me into a monetary discussion, said Serge. I told them it wasn't the money. It was a chance to build a new system from the ground up. He missed his telecom work environment. Whereas IDT, I was really seeing the results of my work. Here you have this monstrous system, and you're patching it right and left. No one is giving you the whole picture. I had a feeling no one at Goldman really knows how it works as a whole, and that's just uncomfortable admitting that. And they are just uncomfortable admitting that. He agreed to hang around for 6 weeks and teach other Goldman people everything he knew, so he continued to find and fix broken bands in the giant rubber band ball. 4 times in the course of those last weeks, he mailed himself source code he was working on. He had later accused of sending himself 32 megabytes, but what he had sent was essentially the same megabytes over 4 times. The file contained a lot of open source code that he had worked on and modified over the past 2 years, mingled together with code that wasn't open source but proprietary to Goldman Sachs. As he would later try and fail to explain to an FBI agent, he hoped to dismantle the one from another in case to remind himself how he had done what he had done with the open source code. In that event, he might need to do it again. He sent these files the same way he had sent files nearly every week since his first month in the job at Goldman. No one had ever said a word to me about it, he said. He pulled up his browser and typed into the words free subversion repository. Up popped a list of places that stored code for free and in a convenient fashion. He clicked on the first link on the list. The entire process took about 8 seconds. And then he did what he had always done since he first started programming computers. He deleted his bash history. To access the computer, he was required to type his password. If he didn't delete his bash history, his password would be there to see for anyone who had accessed the system. It was an entirely innocent act. I knew that I wouldn't be that they wouldn't be happy about it, he says, because he knew their attitude was that anything that happened on Goldman servers was wholly owned proprietary of Goldman Sachs, even when Serge himself had taken the code from open source. When asked how he felt when he did it, he says, I felt like speeding in a car. End of part 4. This has been Tom Doody, middle-aged American living in New Jersey near the Lincoln Tunnel. If you were to visit my website, you would type Howdy Doody into Google. You'll find the correct spelling of the famous puppet. You then combine Tom Doody in a Google search for my site. Thank you for listening. Have a good day, good evening, or restful night's sleep. Ciao.